It is entirely too selfish for me to defend myself amongst these accusations when Laci's missing, and all of the media time should be spent towards finding her, and all of our energy should be spent towards finding her. Unfortunately, suspicion about me has risen to such a degree that I think people have stopped to look for Laci. They've stopped and lost that, and that's why I'm interested in being in the media now.
From time to time, I find myself looking into cases centered around families. There seems to be a concerningly large amount of spouse-turned-killer cases out there. These cases intrigue me in a unique way. For whatever reason, there just seems to be something about a husband or wife killing their spouse or even their child that just makes me feel sick. The very people you love and cherish more than anything in this world. How can someone go so far to take the life of their lover and child? In this documentary, I will be covering a case that fits this exact scenario. This case honestly reminded me a lot of the Ann Dunlap case I covered not too long ago. This is the disturbing story of who killed Laci Peterson and her unborn child. Before I jump right into the sad and tragic details of this unfortunate crime, I feel it is important that I share some information about Laci Peterson and who she was. Laci Denise Rocha, also known as Laci Peterson, was born on May 4th, 1975 in Modesto, California. She was raised on her family's dairy farm in Escalon, California. Escalon is a small town with a little more than 7,000 residents. Laci spent much of her younger life working on the farm and enjoyed gardening with her mother, something she continued to do throughout her life. Unfortunately, early on in Laci's life, her parents got a divorce. Laci moved with her mother to Modesto and visited her father on the farm on the weekends. Laci was a very athletic teenager, participating as a cheerleader in the middle school that she went to and the high school. Laci would go on to study and major in ornamental horticulture, which, for those who aren't familiar, is the agriculture of plants and how to apply them to your everyday life. She studied at California Polytechnic State University, which is one of only 2 polytechnic universities in the state. Laci would often hang out at a place called Pacific Cafe, where one of her friends worked. Here is where the story begins, because it is at this cafe Laci would meet Scott Peterson. It was mid-1994, and Laci had made the first move. She had given Scott her number and told her mom that same day that she had likely met the man she would marry. Scott and Laci began talking and going out on dates together. Their first date was a deep-sea fishing trip, where apparently Laci got very seasick. As the couple's relationship got more serious, the two began to set aside their dreams to create a life together. Scott put aside his professional golf ambitions and focused on a more reachable business path. After 2 years of dating, the two moved in together. At the time, Scott was finishing his senior year of university, and Laci was working in a nearby town called Prunedale. This seems to mark the start of Scott's extramarital affairs. Apparently, at this time, Scott had at least 2 affairs on the side of his relationship with Laci. It is unclear what the relationships were like, or who they were with. After Scott graduated, Scott and Laci got married in Avila Valley on August 9, 1997. The following year, in June 1998, Laci graduated with a bachelor's degree in agricultural business. Not long after this, the couple opened a sports bar named The Shack in San Luis Obispo. The business started slow, but did eventually start booming on the weekends. The Petersons would sell The Shack and move back to Laci's hometown of Modesto. They had purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom bungalow house for around $177,000. Laci would take a job as a part-time substitute teacher, and Scott would work at TradeCorp USA, a newly founded American branch of a European fertilizer company. Scott made quite a comfortable living from this as well. According to Laci's family and friends, She was the ideal housewife who was always cooking, cleaning, or doing something to help out. When Laci found out she was pregnant in 2002, it seemed to be a welcome surprise by everyone. Laci was set to give birth on February 16, 2003, and they were set to have a boy. The couple planned to name their son Connor. Sometime in November 2002, when Laci was 7 months pregnant, Scott met Amber Fry, who was a massage therapist in Fresno. Scott and Amber began having an affair. Amber was unaware of Scott's marriage and soon-to-be newborn child. Less than a month after this affair began, Laci would seemingly vanish into thin air on a 3-day weekend the couple spent together in Carmel, California, the week before Christmas. Carmel, from personal experience, is an absolutely beautiful area. I would definitely recommend checking out the Point Lobos area if you ever get the chance. Aside from Scott Peterson, the last people known to have spoken to Laci before she seemingly vanished were her sister, Amy Rocha, and her mother, Sharon Rocha. Now, I am going to try my best to piece together a timeline of her last known whereabouts. On December 23, 2002, around 5:45 p.m., Laci and Scott went to Amy Rocha's salon, simply named Salon, and Scott had his hair cut. During this time, Amy claimed Scott offered to pick up a fruit basket for her that she had ordered since he would be playing golf in the area anyway. Scott really seemed to want people to know that he was playing golf that day, because according to officials, he had told multiple other people he would be doing so that day. Sharon called her daughter that night at 8:30 p.m. and talked with her. This would unknowingly be the last time she would ever speak to Laci. Scott would go on to claim he had seen Laci the next morning at around 9:30 a.m. on December 24th. He claimed he was golfing, but apparently changed his story to fishing at the Berkeley Marina rather quickly. According to Scott, Stacy was watching a cooking show of some sort while he was leaving. She was doing chores and preparing to walk the dog at a nearby park. At this point, Laci would have been about 8.5 months pregnant. The biased side of me absolutely hates that she would have been doing that much work while being that pregnant, and he was just going off to fish. This would be the last official known whereabouts of Laci. The next day, the neighbor had come knocking as she had found the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie. This neighbor said she found the dog around 10:30 a.m. Another neighbor would come forward to say he saw Mackenzie at around 10:45 a.m. as well, as he was playing with his own dog. An unknown person reported to the Modesto Bee that the dog was found with a muddy leash and was returned to the Petersons' home. The neighbor who returned the dog claimed to see nothing out of the ordinary while doing so. Scott would return home from fishing and notice Laci was gone, and the dog was in the backyard with a muddy leash. Instead of calling the police or loved ones to find out where his 8.5-month pregnant wife was, he decided to take a shower and wash his clothes as they were wet from fishing. Scott reported his wife missing, but only after waiting until after 5 p.m. and calling his mother-in-law. Only then did Ron Gransky, Laci's stepfather, call the police and inform them of his daughter's situation. When police arrived at the home, they were met with a strangely calm Scott Peterson. He really didn't seem to be worried that his extremely pregnant wife was potentially missing and in danger. It's not like Laci was known to run out of the house unannounced, so you would think something out of the norm like this would cause some sort of emotional response. Police found Laci's purse and keys hanging up in the closet, and the dining room table had looked to be meticulously set for a family dinner, assumably for the following night. There was one thing that a detective noticed that disturbed him, though. On the table, a phone book was open to a page with a full-page ad for a defense lawyer. Now, this could be a coincidence, but it is also fair to look at this with a bit of suspicion. As I mentioned before, the police were put off by how calm Scott seemed to be. I know a lot of people make the point that everyone reacts differently in these situations, but we need to be a bit realistic with ourselves. If you had a baby who is due in 2 to 3 weeks, and your pregnant wife is missing, you would undoubtedly be upset, would you not? Despite these weird feelings and Laci's family thinking Scott was guilty from the start, hundreds of searchers volunteered to help find Laci. Modesto police and firefighters searched along Dry Creek, which was the area the Petersons' dog was found. A $25,000 reward was offered and was even increased to $250,000, and even increased once more to $500,000 for any information leading to Laci's whereabouts. A candlelight vigil was held on December 30th to garner more attention to the case. Hundreds of posters, blue and yellow ribbons, and even a website were made and circulated around the area. According to the Wikipedia page on Laci's case, upwards of 1,500 people volunteered to help pass out materials. This is where things start to get pretty sick. On the way to his missing wife's vigil, Scott called Amber Fry and made up some weird elaborate lie that he was on his way to France and was planning on being in Paris for New Year's Eve. He even gave her a fake European phone number that actually just rerouted to his current cell phone number. Scott was quoted as saying, "You know, in my mind, we could be wonderful together for the rest of our lives," on this phone call. The very next day, Scott called Amber to worship how beautiful she was and to tell her he was in Paris. Unknown to him, though, Amber had already sold him out to the police and turned into an informant. Every conversation they had been having over the past week or so had been taped. Amber had found out about Scott's wife and other life about a week after Laci had been reported missing. She mentioned her friend showed her a video of Scott asking for information about his wife's location on TV. When Amber confronted Scott about this, he tried to explain it away, but wasn't making too much sense, saying things like, "There are different kinds of loss, Amber," when being questioned about why he lied about the loss of his wife. Scott would go on to say Laci was, in fact, alive, and she was still in Modesto. This was a major bombshell. At least, so officials thought at the time. As I mentioned before, Laci's family was convinced from the start he had something to do with her disappearance. Their suspicions and fears were only amplified when they saw Amber come forward on TV. An interesting quote I found while reading articles online about the investigation mentions, "I saw more reaction out of Scott when he burned the goddarn chicken." I believe this is a quote from Laci's cousin. I mention this because it seems Scott did not begin to get emotional till he realized Amber was not okay with his lies. Scott tried his best to convince Amber that Laci was indeed aware of the affair and was okay with it. This claim has been heavily refuted by virtually everyone who knew Laci. There is a famous sit-down interview Scott did with Diane Sawyer, where he tries to double down on this point, but I am not sure anyone is buying it. In this same interview, Scott would go on to claim his marriage was, quote, glorious, as well as other interesting choice words.
I told Laci about the relationship. She knew about it, and it's important between us. And we'll continue to search for her and bring her home.
That's another problem people had a big issue with. A lot of Laci's family talked to me and friends saying, if Laci knew that you were having an affair, she would have said something to someone. She wouldn't have kept quiet about it.
I don't know if she mentioned it to anyone or not.
On April 13th, 2003, a couple walking their dog had stumbled upon something grisly. They had found a decomposing body, but the body they found was a surprisingly well-preserved body of a late-term male fetus. The area the body was discovered in was a marshy area in the San Francisco Bay, just north of Berkeley, not too far from where Scott claimed he had been fishing. Upon a closer look, the fetus had its umbilical cord still attached and looked to have been torn and not cut or clamped as the normal practice would be. For whatever reason, a judge sealed off the autopsy results, but I was able to find an Associated Press source that revealed multiple loops of nylon tape had been found around the fetus's neck, along with a nasty cut to the fetus's body. A day later, an unknown passerby was out for a walk when they found another body of a recently pregnant woman. She was wearing beige pants and a maternity bra. She was found washed up on the rocky shoreline of the bay, roughly a mile or so from where the fetus was found. The body was decomposed to the point of being nearly unrecognizable. The poor woman had been decapitated and her limbs were missing. A few days later, on April 18, 2003, DNA results determined the bodies found were that of Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The autopsies reported that Connor's skin was not decomposed at all, but the light side of his body had been mutilated. The placenta and umbilical cord were not found with the body, but elsewhere. Laci's cervix was intact, and the exact date of her death could not be determined. Laci looked to have suffered very severely from a beating. She had 2 cracked ribs, but the coroner could not say if these injuries occurred before or after she died. All eyes were on Scott Peterson at this point. Scott was arrested on April 18, 2003, near a golf course where he claimed to have been meeting his brother and father. His naturally dark brown hair had been suddenly dyed blonde, and oddly, his car was full of miscellaneous items, which included $15,000 in cash, a ton of survival gear, camping equipment, several changes of clothes, 4 cell phones, 2 driver's licenses, one of which was his brother's, and funnily enough, a whopping 12 Viagra tablets. If this doesn't sound like someone trying to disappear and live off the grid, then I don't know what does. To be fair, Scott's father, Laci Peterson, did mention Scott used his brother's ID to get a discount at the golf course, and that Scott had begun to live in his car due to the media attention. Personally, from the reports, it seems his car was so full of stuff that it would be virtually impossible to live out of it. But I digress. Police saw this as an attempt at fleeing from the law. 3 days later, on April 21, 2003, Scott was arraigned in Stanislaus County Superior Court and was charged with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation and special circumstances. He, of course, pled not guilty, and his trial was moved to San Mateo County due to the number of people in Stanislaus County having a biased opinion. The trial began on June 1, 2004, and after many months of grueling trial and testimony, Scott was convicted of first-degree murder for his wife's death and second-degree murder for the death of his unborn child. Scott Peterson was given the death sentence by Judge Alfred DeLucci, who was quoted as saying the murder of Laci Peterson was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Luckily for Scott, California rarely follows through with the death penalty. In March 2019, the California government issues a moratorium for all 737 prisoners on death row in California, including Peterson. Essentially, this postpones any and all executions until the current governor's tenure is done. This seemingly doesn't carry much weight though, since California hasn't gone through with an execution since 2006. There has been a ton of controversy surrounding this case. Like many other cases that gain national attention, there are always conflicting beliefs as to what really happened. As I was researching into this story, I found a very solid article by the New York Post that broke down why Scott was found guilty. To start, the bodies were found only a mile away from where Scott claimed to have been fishing. Scott was noted to have been smirking and smiling throughout the trial. Scott had told Amber Fry he had lost his wife 2 weeks before she even went missing. He exclusively referred to his missing son as Laci's baby and never his own. He took multiple trips to San Francisco Bay around the time the bodies were found. He had $15,000 and a passport hidden in his car when he was arrested. His general lack of emotion or care for his wife's safety. Not all is lost though from this tragic story. Laci and Connor Peterson's death led to the creation of a new law known as the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, also known as Laci and Connor's Law. This act ensures that under federal law, any person who causes death or injury to an unborn child while in the commission of a crime upon a pregnant woman will be charged with a separate offense. In October 2005, a Superior Court judge denied Scott's right to collect a $250,000 life insurance policy. Under California state law, criminals may not profit from insurance policies. Instead, the money was given to Laci's family, more specifically, Laci's mother, as she was the executor of her estate. In 2006, Sharon Rocha wrote a book for her daughter titled For Laci, A Mother's Story of Love, Loss, and Justice, which became a #1 seller on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. Sadly, there has been no more closure as to what exactly happened to Laci Peterson. Why was she killed? Why was she killed in such a violent way? What would have possibly caused Scott to do this? Why not just divorce and move on? There are so many unanswered questions that still remain in this case. I just hope Laci and Connor are resting in peace and Scott gets what's truly coming for him.
He had tried to alter his appearance, dyeing his beard. He had cash, he had a weapon, camping paraphernalia, water purifiers, everything that looked like a man on the run.
He had way too much stuff to be just casually going out of town. That was being prepared to be on the run for a while. They catch him, they got him, they're taking him in. He says, I heard that there were bodies, tell me it wasn't them. He knows that it's them.
One last thing, if that's okay, about Laci, because I know that you get really choked up when you talk about it. Tell me what you love about Laci.
God, what? I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. The photograph for a big smile in the press.
Because you guys met in college, or?
Yeah.
And tell me what connected you two right away. I know she's got a beautiful smile, but what linked you guys?
I don't know, just being able to complete each other. I think that's it.
Thanks for watching this documentary on the disturbing story of what happened to Laci Peterson and her unborn son Connor. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. What are your thoughts on this case? I would really like to know what you think happened here in the comments down below. I really do think Scott had something to do with this. It's hard to say that he didn't, but without knowing a little bit more information about if Laci was having any sort of affairs, we can't really know what the actual motive was unless he wants to tell us. I think he was trying to get away from his life that he had made and felt trapped and was trying to run away with Amber, but I don't think it worked out the way he wanted. I just don't understand why people think they need to kill people to get out of relationships. I know it's a hard and bumpy road, but divorce is there for a reason. If you're unaware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting the Swamp the way you do. It's crazy to think that we're at 165,000 subscribers on here. That's crazy. Onward to the next milestone. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.